This lesson introduces us to the idea of adding and subtracting polynomials. Now, just for clarification, a polynomial, as we've discussed in class, is nothing more than a series of terms that are joined by either adding or subtracting. So, for example, this polynomial here is made up of four terms: 2x to the third, negative 5x squared, positive x or positive 1x, and negative 2. It is being added to another polynomial that also happens to be made up of four terms: 3x to the third, positive 1x squared, negative 1x, and negative 1. So we can add and subtract these polynomials. You can see in this first example, we'll be adding, or these first two examples, and then when we get down to the lower problems, we'll be subtracting the polynomials. And when we add or subtract polynomials, it's all about combining like terms, which is something we've gotten pretty familiar with as we've gone through this year. Just remember, a like term is a term that is made up of the same variable or variables, if it has more than one variable in the term, but also raised to the same power. So we want to make sure we understand that something like 2x to the third, although it has the same variable as negative 5x squared, that's not enough for those to be like terms. It has to be the same variable, they both have x, but also to the same power. So the fact that this term has x to the third and the other term has x squared would not allow us to combine those like terms. So that's something that we should be pretty familiar with, but it certainly warrants reminding. So there are two basic ways that we can go about adding, and for that matter, subtracting. And it doesn't matter what method you use. We're going to go through both, and you can decide which one works better for you. The horizontal method is going to require us to keep track of terms a little more mentally, whereas the vertical alignment gives us an opportunity to kind of set things up in a structured way where we can actually see our like terms, in this case arranged in columns, and we can just add those down. So let's start with the horizontal method. And if you recall in class, we talked somewhat about ordering. So we want to make sure that by the time we're done, our answer flows in the proper order. And that means that we want our variable terms to go in decreasing order. And then we want our constant, the term without the variable, to be the very last thing we see. So if I'm going to take a horizontal approach, I'm going to want to go after the terms that have the highest power to begin with. So I can see here I have 2x to the third. And as I look at this other polynomial, I also see a term with x to the third, another 3x to the third. So if I just did that in my head, I know I would have 5x to the third. What I like to do is just do a simple either check or crossing out, just so I know I've taken care of those. From there, I'll continue moving on down the line. I'll see if there's any x squared terms between the two polynomials, and there are. There's negative 5x squared. And what I'm adding to it is 1x squared. So don't get tripped up with your integer operations. We know negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4. So in this case, negative 4x squared. So I can I can take care of those. I can move on to the terms that are x to the first. I have 1x, but I'm adding negative x to it. So that's going to disappear completely. Those are opposites, so those cancel out. And then we'll move on to the constants. Negative 2 plus negative 1. Again, don't get tripped up with your signs. When you add two negatives, you'll get something more negative. It'll be like saying plus negative 3, but we like to simplify that as minus 3. So this is our final expression. We've taken this first polynomial, 2x to the third minus 5x squared plus x minus 2. When we add it with this other polynomial, 3x to the third plus x squared minus x minus 1, we get a simplified outcome of 5x to the third minus 4x squared minus 3. So notice with the horizontal method, we just kind of kept track of things both in terms of order and in terms of our pieces. And I like to either cross out or check as I go so I don't lose track of any terms. I'll count them, or I just forget to account for them. Okay? So a vertical method, we're going to just line things up a little bit differently. Instead of keeping track of things in our head, we're going to say we're going to take this first polynomial, 3x to the third plus x squared. Now what I'm going to do is actually say plus, and you can either just put a space here, or you can say plus 0x. I just want you to recognize as a placeholder for that spot that would otherwise have x to the first, minus 5. And now what we're going to add, so that's all these terms. And I've just, as I said, I've just put plus 0x in there so I can have all my terms in decreasing order accounted for. Okay? What I'm now going to do is to take the terms of this next polynomial and place them accordingly underneath the terms that are alike with them in the first polynomial. So x to the third is going to go underneath 3x to the third. Plus 4x squared is going to go underneath x squared. And now look at, we have minus 11x, and that goes underneath where we put the placeholder otherwise. So we have a column for that term with x to go. And then likewise, if we wanted to, we could either just say plus and put a space, or you can feel free to put 0 there. Okay? And now all we're going to do is to add these columns down. So I'm going to say 3x squared plus, that's like 1x squared, that's 4x squared. I'm sorry, 4x to the third, 3x to the third plus x to the third is 4x to the third. 1x squared plus 4x squared, well, that's 5x squared. 0x, otherwise nothing, minus 11x is negative 11x. Negative 5 plus 0 is just simply minus 5. And everything is in the proper order. We go from the highest power to the third, down to the second, down to the first, and then down to our constants. So that is our final outcome. So that is our adding in two different ways. And you can choose which of the two methods that you like. Okay? So moving on to subtraction, I'll let you go about the horizontal method on your own. We will do the vertical method worked out. Now, the only thing I want to remind you of is that this negative sign in either case, or the subtraction sign, is essentially telling us we're subtracting each of these individual terms. So that's the equivalent of like distributing that subtraction sign through. So one alternative for you is to say that you're adding, but you're adding the opposites because you're distributing a negative. So it's like you're adding the opposite of negative 2, which is positive 2. You're adding the opposite of positive 2n, which is minus 2n, or negative 2n. You're adding the opposite of negative 4, which is like plus 4. And I actually like turning things into addition. It actually saves me the trouble, or it saves me the confusion that goes along with subtracting, particularly when the signs are not the same. Okay, so that's something that you might want to do, and I would strongly encourage you to do that. So I would consider using basically the equivalent to KCO, keep change opposite, by distributing the subtraction sign. And then you can just simply add. So before we even do anything here, we're going to do 4x squared minus 3x, and we're going to say plus negative 3x squared. We're going to change that to adding the opposite. So instead of saying minus negative x, we're going to say plus the opposite of that, plus x. Instead of saying minus negative 8, we're going to say plus the opposite, plus 8. Now, if you do this, then adding is adding is much more comfortable to us. So let's just get these both lined up, or let's get this one lined up in our vertical form. We'll have 4x squared, 4x squared minus 3x. And I'm going to treat this as addition now. So I'm going to say negative 3x squared, because again, I switched from minus a positive to keep change opposite to plus and negative, so negative 3x squared. because this was minus x as subtracting negative x. I changed to plus positive x. And then because this was minus negative 8, we're going to turn it to plus positive 8. And if you do this, then when you're ready to, you're just simply going to add your terms, okay? So as long as you followed through with distributing, and I really encourage you to distribute that negative sign and turn it into addition, then these are just as straightforward as above. So let's finish this last one off, and I'll leave this other horizontal method for you to check, okay? So let's see, 4x squared minus 3x squared plus negative 3x squared is x squared. Negative 3x minus x, which is what it was originally, is now negative 3 plus, I'm sorry, negative 3x minus negative x is now negative 3x plus positive x. That's negative 2x. And then just simply plus 8. Now, one last thing I'll point out, remember there was an empty space here, so if you want to account for the column, you can just put an underline just as a placeholder. You can even fill in a 0 there, okay? But we're just simply adding the columns, adding the columns, adding the columns, and then we are all set to go. So, your job is to finish up this example of horizontally adding or subtracting. In this case, we converted to adding, and then do the same with these down below, okay? And then we'll check in and we'll do some practice in class. See you then.